What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Magicka Warden, who has gotten a pretty big buff in the Scalebreaker patch. Part of it is due to the changes that were made to the damage over time abilities that have kind of been blanketed across the board and so benefit most Magicka DPS in general. However, the reason why Magicka Wardens have kind of climbed up on the hierarchy of Magicka DPS is mainly because of nerfs to other Magicka DPS. So for example, Magicka Templars lost a bit of DPS with Solar Barrage, and that combined with the improvement to the dots has pretty much made both Magicka Wardens and Magicka Necromancers some of the best Magicka DPS in the game right now, with Magicka Wardens probably, I'd say, sitting at around number 3 to potentially number 2 in the terms of the Magicka DPS pecking order. Magicka Necromancers being on top, mainly due to the fact that they have access to major vulnerability. So, just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over our skills, gear, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. I will be talking a little bit behind some gear substitution, as well as one potential skill substitution that you might want to make in a raid scenario here. From there, we'll go over the rotation on a 3 million dummy just so you guys get an idea of what it's going to look like, and then we'll do a full 21 million dummy trial parse on the raid dummy here so you guys get an idea of how it stacks up compared to some other Magicka DPS. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started here first with gear. So gear has pretty much remained exactly the same for Magicka DPS. Across the board, no matter what class there is, gear has pretty much remained static. There's only one additional set that has been included into the Magicka DPS's sort of toolkit, so to speak. Most of the changes are really just due to the dot changes, and so your skill bars and your rotations are going to change, but your gear for the most part has remained more or less the same. So for Monster Helm set, the strongest one is still going to be Zaan, assuming that you're able to stay within melee range. If you are not, then you do have a few other options instead of Zaan to work with. So first of all, Zaan does come from, I believe it comes from Scalecaller Peak, so you do need to have access to the Dragonbones DLC to get the set. So if you don't have access to Dragonbones DLC, you only have the base game, for example, your next best option is going to be Grothar. So it still has the same limitation as Zaan, so it has to be within 8 meters of whatever it is you want to hit. But unlike Zaan, which is purely single target, Grothar is more AoE. So if you want more AoE focus, then Grothar is actually not a bad option for Magicka DPS. Moving on down the list here, Iceheart is one that I want to call out for two primary reasons. First, it's one of the few Monster Helm sets that has Spell Crit as the one piece, which is actually going to be very useful for ranged fights if you don't want to use Valkynscoria. The second reason is that the two-piece actually provides some pretty good survivability for progression style guilds. So Iceheart gives you an 8600 damage shield for 6 seconds whenever you deal critical damage. The damage itself from that shield while it is up is not very strong. As you can see here, 1124 frost damage within 5 meters every second for 6 seconds. It's not particularly strong, but Iceheart is really great for progression style guilds who might just want the additional survivability from that damage shield that it provides. Moving on down the line here as we continue to go down, Slimecraw is another must-helm set you might want to have on hand. Very similar to Iceheart, the one piece does add Spell Crit, which is very useful for ranged fights, but the two piece grants you minor berserk at all times. So if you guys can see down in the ability bars right now, we're on our front bar and we do not actually have Bird of Prey here. So in those instances where you might not be able to get very good minor berserk uptime from your healers, Slimecraw might be a good Monster Helm to use. A good example of this would be in Asylum Sanctorium, the Trial. You're not going to get very good minor berserk uptime from your healers in most instances. So in this case, Slimecraw would be the Monster Helm set of choice here. Moving on down the line here, the last Monster Helm set you're going to want to potentially pick up is going to be Valkynscoria. This is probably the weakest out of all the Monster Helm sets that we mentioned, aside from Iceheart. Mainly because that one piece just adds max health, so you're basically getting a lot of survivability, but you're trading off DPS as a result. The proc itself is not particularly strong when you compare it to other damage potential. It does have a little bit of an AoE, which is nice, but the damage that it outputs is not particularly great. So Valkynscoria, not that great, but is one of the only Monster Helm sets in the game that you can really use if you have to play at range at all times. The other option, if you want to play at range at all times, is to combine two different Monster Helm sets with Spell Crit as their one-piece bonuses. So, for example, you would run something like one-piece Iceheart and one-piece Slimecraw, so that way you get the two Spell Crit bonuses there. And that's mainly because the only other Maelstrom set that provides spell damage would be Magicka. So you could potentially also combine, for example, one piece Magicka with one piece Ice Heart, so you get the spell crit and the spell damage. But generally speaking, 2 spell crits are going to be better than combining 1 spell crit and 1 spell damage. So that's it for Monster Helm sets. Moving on to other sets. The body, we have Mother's Sorrow, a classic set here, base game, so you can just arm it from Deshan, or you can buy it off Guild Traders. With the Shadow Mundus still being 19% additional critical damage bonus, Mother's Sorrow is a natural fit for any Magicka DPS, and pretty much across the board, across all classes, you definitely want to have a set of Mother's Sorrow. Now, ideally, you want to have this on the body set because it does provide a flat bonus here, but it can also be used as a front bar set if you have another set you would want to wear on the body, for example, False God's Devotion or potentially Siroria. Speaking of Siroria, that is actually our second set here. We have the perfect version here, which comes from Cloud Rest, so you do need to have access to the Somerset expansion in order to farm for Siroria. I have the perfect version here. The imperfect version just drops that max Magicka from the 5-piece bonus there. Ideally, you're going to want to get the perfect version, but understandably, the perfect version is a little bit difficult to get. You need to complete Veteran Cloud Rest on +1 in order to get armor and +2 to get jewelry. So in that instance, because Siroria is a light armor set, you can also swap this out, the jewelry pieces, for example, Mother's Sorrow or whatever second set that you are running. For front bar, we have an Inferno Staff, and the back bar is also Inferno Staff, Maelstrom Inferno Staff. So for enchants and traits, all divines with all max Magicka enchants, you can go with Infused on your large pieces if you'd like. And then for our jewelry pieces, you have 3 Bloodthirsty, you can also go with Infused or Arcane, and then 3 spell damage enchants here. Bloodthirsty is still going to give you the best DPS in general. There are a handful of fights where Infused or Arcane are going to be better, but in general, Bloodthirsty is the trait to go for. For your front bar weapon here, you have Precise with the Flame Damage enchant. You can also go with it Infused with the Flame Damage enchant if you prefer. Precise will give you better return the higher your DPS is, but Infused will be a little bit more consistent. As for your back bar, Maelstrom Inferno Staff infused with a Weapon Damage enchant. You can also use an Absorbent Magicka enchant instead if you want to use something like Blue Food or if you need some help with Sustain. You can also use a Shock Damage enchant if you'd prefer, but it's kind of up to you. The Weapon Damage enchant will give you a little bit more cleave damage compared to the Shock enchant, mainly because the Shock enchant can only proc on one enemy at a time. Now, I do want to point out here that Siroria on the front bar is generally something that you want to avoid. However, Siroria in this instance is probably going to be the best fit for a front bar set. You still gain the spell damage bonus while you're on your back bar, and I believe you still gain the stacks while you're on your back bar as long as you're within the circle. But for more, let's say, mobile fights, for fights where you're not 100% certain whether you'd be able to maintain the Siroria bonus there, for example, you might be stuck on your back bar, or you might not be able to light attack anything for a certain amount of time, Siroria is not going to be quite as strong here as a front bar set. So in that instance, you're going to want to replace it with one of the following sets that I'm going to start listing out now. So we're going to start things off just kind of going right down the list here in alphabetical order, starting with Cyrodiil sets. So naturally, the set that everybody likes to talk about is Spell Strategist. So this is a rewards for the worthy set, so you will need to jump into Cyrodiil if you want to get this yourself, if you want to farm for it. The alternative would be just to buy it straight off of Guild Traders. Spell Strategist is very good for single target DPS. It gives you additional 500 spell damage against whatever enemy you mark with a light attack for 5 seconds on a 4-second cooldown. So really great for single target, but not so great for AoE, so just keep that in mind if you want to run Spell Strategist. Now this is a light armor set, so you can wear this on the body or as a front bar set here. Moving on down the line here with dungeon sets, there are a handful of dungeon sets that you might want to consider picking up. First one being Burning Spellweave. So in this particular patch, we do have a couple of additional dust that do deal flame damage, so your proc overall uptime should be a little bit higher for Burning Spellweave on this patch, Scalebreaker, compared to previous patches. This is a proc set, so you can wear this on the front bar if you'd like. You can get this from City of Ash, either 1 or 2, so pretty easy farm overall. So it's kind of up to you whether you want to wear this as a front bar, depending on how lucky you are getting an Inferno Staff of the Burning Spellweave. Moving on from there, though, the only other set that I would recommend you pick up potentially would be the new Zaan's Redress from Lair of Marsalok. This is more of a support set, less of a raw DPS set. So it's not that great, the armor bonuses, because the 2-piece adds magical regen, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it definitely doesn't really increase your overall DPS ceiling. The 5-piece basically applies a debuff on the enemy, and as long as that debuff is on the enemy, every single target dot that you have on the enemy will result in 1% increase in damage taken, up to a maximum of 5%. So this is actually fairly decently strong as a support set for Magicka DPS. In addition, the debuff lasts for 20 seconds and is refreshed every time you do a light attack, so it's actually pretty easy to maintain the full 5% on Zaan's redress, at the very least on a Magicka Warden. It's definitely a set that I would recommend holding on to in case your raid lead might ask you to run it, for additional support, for additional damage for the rest of the group. Your own DPS will drop as a result of running this set, but the overall group DPS increase is, generally speaking, going to offset that loss in personal DPS. Moving on to some overland sets, there's a handful of them that you might want to consider getting. First one's going to be Spinner's Garments. This is going to be used more for AoE fights and trash fights for the additional penetration that you get. Not absolutely necessary because Magicka DPS in general have higher innate penetration than stamina DPS, but still something you might want to consider picking up. But from beyond that, not that many other overland sets. There's Necropotence, that does synergize very well with Wardens because of your bear pet. But this just gives you raw max Magicka, which is, while does provide you some additional DPS, it's not quite as strong as, for example, Mother Sorrow, which gives you additional crit chance. The same can be said for Crafty Alfiq, which is the other set. This is basically a weaker version of Necropotence here, which is without the requirement of having a pet active. So if you want to, for example, not run the bear ultimate, you could run Crafty Alfiq instead. The advantage of Necropotence and Crafty Alfiq is the fact that they are, generally speaking, going to be a little bit cheaper to get than Mother Sorrow, but at the same time, they're not necessarily easier to farm for. So I would recommend not even bothering with Necropotence and Crafty Alfiq and just going straight over to Mother Sorrow, because you can purchase all three of these sets from guild traders. And finally, for trial sets, the first set I want to talk about is going to be Master Architect. This comes from the Halls of Fabrication, so you do need to have access to Vardenfell in order to grab this set here. Pretty nice overall when combined with the Bear Ultimate. The Bear Ultimate only costs 75 Ultimate, making it one of the cheapest ultimates in the game. And so Master Architect helps provide not just you with some DPS, but also 2 other people with Major Slayers. So overall pretty useful, particularly because Magicka Wardens are probably one of the few DPS specs that are able to provide this Major Slayer for ranged DPS. So if you're playing at range, then Master Architect is a pretty solid set to go for if you want to help support your group overall. This can be worn as either a front bar set or a body set, but if you do wear this as a front bar set, just bear in mind that you will need to activate your ultimate on the front bar. You can't activate it on the back bar. From there, the last set I want to talk about is going to be False God's Devotion. This comes from the Sunspire Trial from the Elsewhere expansion. This reduces the cost of your Magicka abilities by 8% and also gives you a lot of additional armor bonuses. A total of 4 armor bonuses when you have the perfected version. So pretty strong set because you get a lot of additional stat boosts just from the 2, 3, 4, and the 5-piece bonus as well. Plus it also gives you some nice sustain bonuses with the reduction in Magicka cost. That being said, your DPS ceiling is not necessarily going to be higher than if you're using this set compared to Siroria, but it is still a solid set to consider holding on to. You can wear this on the body or in the front bar set, but generally speaking you want False God's Devotion as the body set, so that way you maintain that 4 or 5-piece bonuses on both bars rather than losing it when you're on your back bar. And that is pretty much it for gear. Moving on to our character sheet. I am a Dark Elf. Dark Elves are going to be one of the better races for Magicka Warden, so Magicka DPS in general. The absolute best from a mathematical standpoint would be the Altmer, the High Elves. They get 2000 max Magicka, 258 additional spell damage. Dark Elves only get 1875 max Magicka and 258 spell damage. But they also get 1875 additional max stamina and 258 additional weapon damage, so if you want to, for example, swap over to a stamina DPS later on down the line, Dark Elves are a pretty solid option. You can also decide to run as a Breton, which get 2000 max Magicka and 7% cost reduction to Magicka cost, as well as a little bit of additional Magicka regen. So pretty solid if you're struggling with sustain, or you just want to be able to sustain your rotation overall. But your DPS ceiling will drop because you do not have the additional 258 spell damage from the elves. Moving on from there, you also have the Khajiits. So if you kind of want a jack of all trades, if you want to use this character as your main and try to dip your toes into healing, DPSing, and tanking, Khajiits are a fairly solid choice. They get a flat boost of 875 across Magicka health and stamina. They get 85 Magicka and stamina regen, 100 health regen, and they get 10% additional critical healing done and critical damage done. So overall, really balanced. They're not really going to be the best in any of the 3 roles in the game, but they will be solid enough, again, to kind of fit into that jack of all trades, master of none sort of archetype. Moving on from there, in terms of attributes, we have 64 points into Magicka here. Depending on what food you're using, you might want to shift some points into health, or you might want to run a couple of health enchants. If you're running blue food, so just base game blue food, max health, max Magicka, you won't need to put any points into health. But if instead you're running Clockwork Fisher's Fillet or Witchmother's Potent Brew, then you might want to consider putting some points into health here because your max health is going to be a little bit on the low side. Generally speaking, you're going to want to hit at the very least 18k max health when you have Ebon and Minor Toughness active. So that's kind of the magic threshold that you want to hit, around 18k, 19k to be on the safer side of things. In terms of food, we are running blue parsed food here, so this is ice cream, so we get max Magicka and the Magicka regen. This is just to give some consistency across the board for all of our different parses here. All of the parses are going to be using this parsed food here, so just give this a little bit more consistency. It also provides us a little bit more realistic in terms of Magicka regen, because we will get some resources back whenever you use a synergy, and so this will give us a little bit of additional regen here, if you want to compare this to something like Clockwork Fisher's Fillet or Witchmother's Potent Brew. For Mundus, we are using the Shadow Mundus, still the strongest Mundus in the game for DPS. Moving on to our skills. For our front bar, we have Degeneration, Deep Fissure, Fetcher Infection, Blue Betty, Scalding Rune, and Eternal Guardian. And on our back bar, we have Consuming Trap, Flame Reach, Unstable Wall of Fire, Winter's Revenge, Barbed Trap, and Eternal Guardian. Now, if you're not able to be within melee range to get Barbed Trap to go off, you have 2 options as replacements. First one is going to be Channel Acceleration under the Sigil Order line, but this does require you to have access to the Somerset expansion. If you don't have access to the Sigil Order skill line, instead you can run the other morph of Trap Beast, which is Light Waste Beast Trap. Now, in Elsewhere it has 6-second duration, but in Scalebreaker they bumped it up to a 10-second duration, so it's actually not that bad to use anymore, plus they also cut the cost a little bit as well. So if you need to play at ranged and you don't have access to the Sigil Order line, you can run Lightweight Beast Trap. Otherwise, if you can stay within that melee range, then just stick with Barbed Trap instead. Now, one ability that you could potentially switch out here in a raid would be Winter's Revenge, and you would swap this out for Mystic Orbs. Mystic Orb is actually a pretty strong damage over time ability, primarily because if somebody were to activate the combustion synergy, it actually does not disappear anymore, so the orb will continue to float on by, doing its damage. It does 12-19 magic damage every half second in this instance here, and if you want to compare it to Winter's Revenge, which deals 15-35 frost damage every second, you can clearly see that Mystic Orbs is actually a pretty decent ability, assuming that you're able to get the full 10-second duration on it, because it does move across the map at a rate of 2 meters per second, so you might not necessarily be able to get all 20 ticks of the Mystic Orb on a single boss. It kind of depends on the boss's size, which direction you're facing, and so on. But Mystic Orbs is actually very useful. It's a very strong damaging ability, and it also provides some additional opportunities to activate the combustion synergy for your allies as well. This also considerably opens up the possibility of having an additional ability slot open on a healer, because now you're able to run Mystic Orbs for the combustion synergy compared to the healer running Energy Orb for the synergy instead. Just something to consider for raids. In an ideal scenario, Mystic Orbs is going to be stronger than Winter's Revenge, but it will be fight dependent. Moving on to our CP, the CP cap is still 810, which gives us 270 points across each of our different constellation types. Starting with green CPs, we have 100 Arcanist, and I have 75 in Tenacity, but just going to shift this downward if you'd like. The next couple of jump points would be 64, 56, and 49. Depends on how often you find yourself heavy attacking to sustain your rotation. Moving on, it's kind of up to you where you want to put the remainder of your green CPs. So for example, I have 31 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord. Jumping over to our blue CPs, I do want to point out that the 9 I have in Spell Erosion is assuming that you have all of your debuffs active. So that would be things like Torg's Infused Crusher, Alkosh, and so on and so forth. If you're not using one of these sets, so for example you're not running Torg's Crusher, or you don't think you'll be able to get very good uptime on these debuffs, you might want to shift some points into Spell Erosion out of these other nodes here. So for example, you can drop Elfborn down to 56, you could drop Master at Arms down to 52, you can drop Staff Expert down to 9, I believe. The only thing you don't really want to touch is going to be a Thaumaturge at 75. Due to the fact that Off Balance now lasts for 7 seconds and has a 20-second cooldown, this does make the Exploiter passive fairly strong. In combination with the very dot-heavy DPS meta now, Thaumaturge and Exploiter now are really potentially strong abilities, passives to pick up here. So we are going back to the old meta of about a year and a half ago of 75 points in the Thaumaturge for the Exploiter passive. And anticipate a video coming out pretty soon, just kind of describing how I went about figuring out whether Exploiter would be worthwhile on, at the very least, a Magicka Warden. Moving on from there, though, the other blue CPs have 56 into Master at Arms, 13 into Staff Expert, the 9 into Spell Erosion, 56 into Elemental Expert, and 61 into Elfborn. Finally, for our red CPs, this is going to be a very generic approach, kind of a balanced approach to the overall damage mitigation. You have 81 into Ironclad, 61 into Thickskin, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Now, talking about our rotation here. The rotation concept itself for Magicka Warden has not changed, at the very least for this particular build, where it's basically going to be centered around Deep Fissure, your Shulk's move. It has a 3-second duration. You can think of it as a 3-second dot, so basically when you cast Shulks, you have time for 2 other abilities or 1 heavy attack, and then you can use Shulks again. So generally speaking, your rotation is going to look something like this. It's going to be Shulks, 2 abilities, Shulks, 2 abilities, and so on and so forth here. So beyond that, the real key thing here is going to be prioritizing which dots to maintain. The big one you want to maintain is going to be Elemental Blockade for the Maelstrom bonus. That much is pretty obvious. From there, though, you're going to want to prioritize it based on utility and damage. In terms of utility, Barbed Trap is something you want to try to maintain for the additional minor force uptime. Very powerful in order to get that. From there, Degeneration is a very strong move. As you can see here, 28.3k over 12 seconds, making it a pretty strong dot. Plus, you get the additional Magicka Restoration whenever you deal whenever you do light attacks or heavy attacks against the enemy. So very useful there. From there, you have Fissure Infection, which deals 25k over 10 seconds. Pretty strong there. And then Soul Trap, which deals 22.6k over 10 seconds. The other next couple of abilities aren't going to be quite as useful. So for example, Winter's Revenge is not quite as strong, neither is Flame Reach, nor is Scalding Rune. So the main abilities you want to maintain are really going to be Blockade comes first. Blockade is definitely the ability you want to maintain as best you can. From there, you want to maintain Barbed Trap, Fissure Infection, Degeneration, and Soul Trap. Not necessarily in that order. I'd probably say Degeneration is going to be most important, followed by Fissure Infection and then Soul Trap, with Barbed Trap being above all of those for the minor force. And then from there, Flame Reach, Winter's Revenge, and Scalding Rune. Generally speaking, in that order. You can probably even drop Winter's Revenge all the way down to the very bottom if you'd like. And if you're running Mystic Orbs, then Mystic Orbs is going to probably be in the same order of magnitude there. It's a pretty strong dot, so I'd probably put this above, if you're using Mystic Orbs instead of Winter's Revenge, above Flame Reach and Scalding Rune, if you decide to use that ability. But generally speaking, your rotation pretty much is going to look something like this. So I generally just use all of my backbar dots right off the bat. Then it's just every 2 abilities, just make sure you're using your Shulks. So on and so forth. You can see here there's a lot of dots that are happening here. If there is ever a time where your dots seem to be ending up pretty much you don't really have a dot that you need to really throw out again, just use a heavy attack and just go back to your rotation once your dots run out and you can reapply them there. So with that, let's go ahead and reset the dummy here and get started with our 200 million damage parse so you guys can get an idea of where Magicka Warden stand compared to some other Magicka DPS. So this parse will be comparable to other Magicka DPS specs. The one thing I also want to point out here is that I will be using the Bear Ultimate on my front bar here. Ideally, you want to do that just because your front bar will generally have better stats than your back bar, but if you're not running Master Architect on the front bar, you can realistically use your Bear Ultimate whenever on your front or back bar, but generally try to do it on your front bar if you can because of the higher stats on your front bar. So let's go ahead and get started here with this parse. Try to maintain your blockade. You also want to try to maintain Betty if you can. Oops. Bar shot when I wasn't supposed to. Execute, nothing much changes here. The bear pretty much auto executes on its own. There's no need to worry about changing rotation at all for execute. There we go, that is the entirety of the rotation itself. A little bit lower than what I have hit in the past. I have hit up to around 91k, but that's probably the highest I've been able to hit so far. This part's a little bit worse, with about 89.2k, 89.3 if we round up a little bit, but overall pretty strong compared to where it used to be. Magicka Wardens now are definitely a pretty strong DPS spec, particularly combined with all the dot changes that have been made and the nerfs to other Magicka classes here. So You can see here, generally speaking, we had a little bit of RNG chance here, so our overall crit wasn't quite as high. 64.4% of our hits were crits compared to our mean of 69.5. So I'd call that overall low crit RNG. Take a look at where that low crit's coming from. Seems to be a lot of it's coming from, oh, it's from Barbed Trap, never mind. So it does seem like most of it is actually on the ball here. It looks like our average just brought down because of Barbed Trap. But most of these do seem to be pretty close to 69% or so. The only one really being Crushing Swipe being at around 60%, which is not terrible, but also not great either. But you can see here under Guardian's Wrath, which is the activated ability of the ultimate, we can hit pretty high, 136k here with all of the buffs, actives, and things like that. So definitely Magicka Wardens have kind of come back from the brink, so to speak. They are actually fairly decent this patch, so I'm really excited because that's my main Magicka DPS spec. But in general, this is definitely a strong class to play, and the rotation itself pretty much exemplifies what the Scalebreaker kind of meta is becoming. A lot of single target dots for Magicka DPS. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions about the build, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Again, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.